What's going down, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Commander ad Populum. Commander for the people, by the people, for the people. This is episode 9. My name is Ryan. I'm back in Studio CCO, me, 4 walls, the CCO green screen, and I am ready to tackle another community submitted topic today. But before we get into that, first I'd like to thank my sponsors, Fusion Gaming, FusionGamingOnline.com for all your Commander needs, for all your Magic the Gathering needs, I should say. Big thank you to them. Big thank you to the manabase.com. That's where you can find Commander ad Populum as well as all of the other sponsored content for FusionGamingOnline.com. Check out both sites. I'd very much appreciate it. Getting a little bit of business and social media coordinates out of the way. If you'd like to submit your own community topic, you can do so by replying to the pinned post on facebook.com/CADPopcast or Commander ad Populum. Either way, you'll find it. You could get after me on Twitter at CADPopcast, CADPOPCAST. Shoot me a message on Twitter or just at me on Twitter. And finally, CADPopcast@gmail.com if you have something a little bit longer form, I guess. Final thing, I am two patrons away from reaching my first stretch goal, and that is the altered art tutorial. I'm going to call it content. The first few might be a combination of written articles and pictures for kind of how to get started, and I might move into videos. People seem to like, I see a lot online, I see time-lapse videos of people altering cards, like how all the different steps of taking a card from being just a regular card to being a piece of art, I guess. So 2 patrons away. If you were thinking about becoming a patron, patreon.com/CADPopcast. I'd very much appreciate that. You can help grow the show, grow the community. And of course, that gets you access to the Commander ad Populum Discord, as well as discounts on alters or reduced shipping rates if I've got to send you stuff. So it really helps out. I don't just say that to try and make a buck. It actually does keep the show running. So if you are in a position to support the show, I'd very much appreciate that. And maybe you'll be the patron that unlocks the bonus content or the altered art tutorial content, and you can learn how to alter Magic cards with me as your teacher. I swear, I'm a good teacher. That was like a thing that I used to be really good at. It's probably still true. Speaking of teaching, you can hear my voice is probably like, I don't know if it sounds really high or if it sounds really low. I don't know. Either way, I'm pretty sure that once every 2-3 months, my kid will just cough into my mouth and I end up sounding like this for a few days. So I think on episode like 2 or something. Now it's episode, what did I say, 9? It's like 7 weeks. Got a cold again. So sorry, everybody. Anyways, getting into it today, the community section for episode 9. We've got a Facebook suggestion from patron Armando about budget building. And I don't know if that's a term that I like to use. Like this is, when I think of spending money to make a good commander deck, like that just doesn't make a whole bunch of sense to me, because you can spend very little money and have a great deck. It's just not going to be as fast, or you might not have an optimized 5-color mana base or what have you, right? So the way I think of it is build to what you have or build to what you want to spend, right? Like, let's say your collection's not that big, you're newer to Magic, you only have standard legal cards or whatever, you don't have any of the really old stuff, which happens to be the most expensive stuff. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the retrospective section today. And you want to spend like $100 or 50 or 20 or whatever it is. I think what we have to do or how we tackle a build that's only going to cost us 50 or 20 bucks or whatever it is say, instead of trying to lock the game down or combo out, or do a whole bunch of damage to eliminate players on turns 5, 6, 7, we have to say, how do we build decks, or how do we optimize decks to win on turns 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever it is, right? The later into the game your deck can win, the less expensive it's going to be, I guess. That's what I'm trying to get through. Okay, so I can put in 10 mana rocks or 14 mana rocks or 2 mana rocks, whatever it is. And I can spend, hundreds or thousands of dollars on them. Or I can put in the same number of mana rocks and spend, $5 on them. And the difference is going to be 2 things, really. It's going to be how much they what their converted mana cost is and how much mana they give us back in return. So when you look at things like Sol Ring's a bad example, so we're not going to look at that right now. But when you look at things like Mana Crypt, zero converted mana cost, taps to give you 2 mana. Or Mana Vault, 1 converted mana cost, taps to give you 3. Grim Monolith, 2 converted mana cost, taps to give you 3. Those are not only the 3 most prolific mana rocks in the game because they give you so much more than you're putting into them, but they also cost so much money. Lion's Eye Diamond could go into the same category, but usually people use that to combo instead of like accelerate their game, at least in my experience. So when you look at the prices, and I'm going to ballpark just based on memory, like I'm going to go Mana Crypt is $120, Grim Monolith is like $150, and Mana Vault is, I'm going to say $50. So if you've got $320 or $330 to spend on 3 cards, have at it. Or if you've had those cards forever because you've just played for a long time, have at it. And like, that's fine. And I don't think that you're going to run into anybody who, at least not in today's Commander community, that's going to say, oh yeah, you just won because you da-da-da-da-da, and be sour about it, right? They're going to say, oh yeah, I can understand that you won because you had turn 1 Mana Crypt, turn 2 Mana Vault, and that allowed you to just like power out your commander on turn 2 or 3 or whatever, and that's why you won. So when we talk about building budget, and we don't want to spend $300+ on 3 mana rocks, we want to spend $3. Our first include, of course, is Sol Ring because it's arguably the best card in the format, and cheap, it's like $5 or less. Or if you buy the Commander products that are released every year, every one has always contained a Sol Ring every single year. So you might have 4, you might have 15 of those just kicking around, right? You add a few rocks that will accelerate you into the mid game. You use that acceleration to deal with the decks that are faster than you. And in doing so, the early to mid, even the mid-late game might be spent just controlling the board or trying to gum up the board with creatures to keep the battlefield on lockdown. And that's going to get you into the late game, the late game, to do what your deck is trying to do. And I don't want to say like if you don't have the money, you have to play control. That's not what I'm saying. But if you can build your deck in a way that allows you to accelerate a little bit early game, control the board in the mid game when the air quotes faster decks are trying to win, and then when you can start to really turn your deck on in the late game, once everybody's either expended resources or can't get through your control shell or whatever it is, that's when you try and win. I think that's how my Vivictus Asmati deck works. And I mean, it's got powerful cards in it, but the powerful cards are in the 8, 9, 10, 12 mana slots. I'm looking at like Razaketh, It That Betrays, Ulamog, the things I want to flip over when Vivictus Asmati triggers. And the reason I go to this deck is because it plays some very affordable ramp early game, like Rampant Growth, Into the North. Those are 2 mana things that let you find basics and put them into play tapped. It plays Commander's Sphere and Pristine Talisman, 3 mana rocks. Darksteel Ingot, 3 mana rocks that tap to give you any color. Mind Stone, 2 mana rock that taps for 1. Plays a bunch of that early game. It deals with some threats mid-game. It'll land a Vivictus. Vivictus will immediately die, but because I have so much mana, I can just cast him again next turn for 8. Or it plays Reanimation so I can get him back from the graveyard for 2 the second time instead of 8 the second time from the command zone. It allows me to a little bit just play the long game, let the game ride out, let my commander die, cheat him back into play, and then late game do the very powerful stuff. And by very powerful, I mean like Razaketh, sacrifice a creature to tutor for my win condition, or It That Betrays, that whenever I pick a land with Vivictus's attack ability, they sacrifice it and then I get the land. And then eventually I just lock everybody out with my 12/12 and my 6/6 flyer where I'm stealing all their land. I guess I should have said Vivictus, every time he attacks, for each opponent, I choose a permanent, they sacrifice it, then they reveal the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they get it. If it's not a permanent card, they don't get it. And because I have to do that too when he attacks, I just build my deck with all permanents. So it's built to withstand the early game, the mid game, and then really come alive in the late game. Kind of feels like a very traditional commander style deck. And if you can't run because you can't afford the very expensive mana rocks or the very cheap CMC tutors, like my Vivictus deck is Jund, so it could play Vampiric Tutor and it could play Demonic Tutor, but instead I play Diabolic Tutor and I play Razaketh because the deck is built to withstand the mid game so it can get to the late game. So 4 mana for my tutor when I have 15 mana isn't that big of a deal because I could literally spend 4 mana for my tutor for an Ulamog, and still have the 11 mana left over to cast them. What else am I going to do with the mana, right? Like my hand's empty, it's turn 15, cast my Ulamog, win. A couple other ways I do this, and I mentioned Pristine Talisman, 3-drop mana rock that whenever you tap it for mana, you gain a life. Doesn't seem like a lot, and life gain is traditionally terrible unless you can gain huge chunks of it at once. But over the course of a game, and again, if we're building these budget decks to withstand the mid and late game, we're going to be able to tap that mana rock maybe 10 times, maybe 12 times. Like 3 mana, I got to tap it 3 times to get the 3 mana back out of it, and I'm going to gain 3 life doing that. But if I can do that 10 more times, I've netted 10 mana off of it, and I've netted 10 life off of it. That's pretty good. The gain or the refuge lands do this as well. They don't gain you a life every time you tap them, but they do allow you to gain a life when you put them into play. And I'm not saying like jam every single refuge or gain land that you can, but a few over the course of a game or a few over the course of many, many games are going to net you a bunch of life. And you never know when 2, 3, 4 life in a game is going to matter. It could take away somebody from doing Xaxes to you so they attack someone else, which gives you 1 extra turn to survive, right? Over the course of however many games you play with your budget deck, that could be a thing. So that's what I think about budget decks. It's not really a restraint. All you have to do is just change your mindset of when you think you want the game to end, and you have to focus on surviving until the late game, where you can play those more affordable cards to greater effect. Okay, for the technical section today, we're going to switch it up a little bit. I've been talking about over the last 2 or 3 weeks about my Hogak Arisen Necropolis deck that I've been thinking about. I haven't started brewing anything yet. I'm still theorizing. I'm still waiting for, the modern players to kind of figure out what's good and what's not good. And honestly, I don't want to build something that is so new, so in the forefront of everybody's mind because of modern, and then just have somebody sit down and say, oh yeah, you're just playing that because it's good in modern, or you're just going to sit down and play it with Bridge from Below and Vengevine, just like the modern list. I don't want to be that guy that sits down and plays that. So we're still going to touch on the Hogak build, but it's kind of been put on hold for a while until all that kind of fleshes itself out. I guess the modern metagame has to adapt a little bit to find out how to fight it. And then once they do, I'm going to do something totally different anyways. So I've been talking to a couple of my friends when we play on Tuesday nights. I want to build something really weird like 10 land Hogak. Just 10 lands. Bunch of cheap dudes or free dudes, and you just tap them for mana or tap them to cast Hogak, and that's it. That's what I want to build. So it's going to be something spicy, but it's just on hold for right now. This is the technical section, so we will talk about something a little bit techie. And I'll refer to Hogak in that he's so crazy. So I got him in my command zone. You cast him, whatever. He dies. You let him go to your graveyard. And you could, cast a mana dork. Let's say I cast a Llanowar Elf and a Birds of Paradise. And I've got, 25 cards in my graveyard. So it comes to my turn, untap, upkeep, I draw, I play my Llanowar Elf, I play my Birds of Paradise. After I play my Birds of Paradise, I just say hold priority, and I can tap my birds and my elf to pay for Hogak's cost. And nobody can respond to that. Nobody can say oh, I'll Tormod's Crypt your graveyard, right? Because I literally have my bird hit the battlefield and I say hold priority. I take Hogak out of my graveyard and put it onto the stack. because I have priority to do that because it's my main phase as the active player. And people can't respond to that because they don't have priority until I take an action. Then they get priority in turn order. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I cast my Hogak, I put him onto the battlefield, and then players 2, 3, 4 go, oh, we need to deal with that, or what have you, right? And I want to make sure that new players are aware that when somebody casts something, there is a process to either respond to it or counter it or destroy it. So I take my Hogak out of the graveyard, it's on the stack, I tap my 2 Convoke creatures, I exile every card that I need to out of my graveyard to delve it, and it's on the stack. Costs are paid, and I say, okay, that's all I want to do. Is that going to resolve? Player 2 then has the opportunity to do something. If they choose to take no actions, then it's player 3's turn, and then it's player 4's turn, and if the final player in the game doesn't take any action while my Hogak is on the stack, it resolves and it enters the battlefield. So it enters the battlefield, priority goes back to the active player, that is me. I could say hold priority and I could do something else, but in this example, I'm just going to end my turn. They got nothing else, I'm going to end my turn. So player 2 goes, they untap, they've got a removal spell, they kill my Hogak. Any other player can respond to that removal spell, but they have to do it in turn order. So if I have a counter spell, let's just pretend I have a black-green counter spell. I got Dash Hopes. That's a black counterspell. That'll work. Dash Hopes. Look it up. I can respond, but now I'm the last player in the priority line. So player 2 puts his destroy spell on the stack. Player 3 has a chance to respond. Player 4 has a chance to respond. And then I have a chance to respond. And a lot of the times you see people just, I call it jumping priority. And if the destroy spell goes on the stack, I go counter it. That's a little bit out of priority, and I'm not allowed to do that unless player 2 and 3 have all said that they don't want to do anything. And we shortcut that just by saying, I'm going to counter it because nobody else wants to counter somebody killing my big creature, right? But it gets a little bit trickier. Instead of a removal spell, let's pretend that player 2 played their own big creature, and I've got a removal spell in my hand. Instead of me jumping priority over the next couple players in line, I would maybe say something like, oh, now we got to deal with that. You guys thought Hogak was the problem, but now we got to deal with, name another big creature, Worldspine Worm. Even though I have the removal spell to deal with it, I'm not going to use it because A, I don't have priority, and B, I could use my words to have that creature get pointed in a different direction. I would maybe say something like, player 3, player 4, can you guys deal with that? Can you counter it? And if they don't, then I could counter it or I could kill it or whatever, right? Or if it comes back around full cycle of the table and it's player 2's turn again, now they can attack with their big creature, I would leave my mana open and not kill the creature for as long as possible. So they go into combat phase and they go to beginning of combat step. And I say, okay, just so you know, I got mana open. I would attack one of these 2 guys. And just saying something like that is going to kind of tip my hand just maybe enough to make them not attack. And this is the most common practice when you're playing white and you have 1 white mana open. People are going to think you have like a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile. So I guess the moral of the story is everybody has to kind of go around the table and make sure that they give everybody a chance to respond in turn order before somebody else just jumps the gun. Because if you're the one jumping the gun and you've got 2 players in between that spell and you that have a chance to respond, you could be saving yourself some mana and some cards by just saying, can you respond? Can you respond? Or can you kill it? Can you kill it? If they say no, then you still got to spend the mana. But if they can kill it, then you've saved a card and the mana. Of course, I'm not encouraging anybody to lie, but you can use fairly creative language. Like, instead of saying, oh, I can't kill it, then they attack you and you kill it and you've lied to them, you could say, oh, well, we need to kill that. That's the biggest threat on the board. Or that thing is going to kill all of us if we can't counter it or kill it, right? You just have to be a little bit selective with how you word things to make other people realize that they have to do something. You can very lightly prompt them, and then you might be able to save yourself some mana and some cards. Again, over the long run. It's not going to work every time, but over the course of 10 games or a month or week to week to week at F&M, you're going to end up saving some cards and mana, and eventually that is going to equate to net positive outcomes, and enough of those net positive little incremental advantages are going to win you more games. Like, that's just how it works. So know how priority works, know how to politic, know how to use your words to make other people do stuff for you. Okay, last little bit, the set retrospective. And this is going to be a little bit of a short one because I actually wanted to touch base on Chronicles and Renaissance. And what I wanted to kind of go into was what the sets were about, or what their aim was, what sets they featured, because they were reprint sets, and kind of what the lasting effects of them were. So Chronicles, and I'm gonna lump the foreign language Renaissance set in with Chronicles as well. What they were was a set of cards, 116 of them in Chronicles, and like in Renaissance there was like 118 or something, and then Italian Renaissance was like 62 or something. Whatever it was, it's not important. They were all reprints, and the English Chronicles was Arabian Nights, Antiquities, mostly Legends cards, and the Dark. So all sets we've looked at in the past, so you know what cards are going to be in here. And the aim with Chronicles and Renaissance was to get more cards, more of the desirable cards from sets into players' hands. Like the Antiquities one, like had Ashnod's Altars, and the Legends reprints had the Elder Dragons and Powerful Legends, Ball Lightning and Blood Moon from the Dark, for example. So all cards that we are familiar with. And you know that they're Chronicles cards because they have white borders, but they have the original set symbol. And they're worth nothing, except for maybe Blood Moon. The point was to reprint these cards, get them into players' hands. And of course, Renaissance being French, German, and Italian was to get them into player hands in Europe. Interesting, Renaissance actually have black borders. So when you hear people say FBB or foreign black border when referencing like dual lands or whatever, the dual lands from Italian Renaissance, I can't remember what it was called, like Renaissintio or something. Those are the first printings in that language. So Wizards' policy at the time was to give them black borders, even though they were reprints. So that's why they're worth a little bit more, because they're black bordered. But they are foreign language, so some people don't like them as much. Regardless, these came out in July of 95, just after Ice Age, and just far enough after Fallen Empires for Wizards of the Coast at the time to see, oh wait, Fallen Empire still exists everywhere on the planet. We're not going to include Fallen Empires in the Chronicles set, because that would have made it even worth less. So you get the cards into the hands of the players, and it was going to be like, you've got your Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised, 4th edition, 5th edition, 6th edition. That was their plan. And then they were going to have a reoccurring Chronicles set that was supposed to take cards that weren't in the core set and make more of them. And they were always just going to reprint them with white borders to continuously supply the player base with cards that they needed. And for any new players coming in, if they wanted to play with some of the older, more powerful cards, Chronicles was going to be the rolling set that introduced non-core set cards to newer players. And it's a little bit redundant now because that's what the core set does, but that's what the original aim of Chronicles was to do. And the backlash that Chronicles caused was so crazy that it was canceled after, just a couple months of printing, and they never did it again. People were so concerned at the time that the value of their Elder Dragons from Legends was going to plummet through the floor that they said that they were going to quit Magic and never play again. And ultimately, a few years later, Chronicles led to what we now call the reserved list. I'd like to hear people's topics on the reserved list. If you want to give them to me, I'll have a Facebook post saying what the topics of this show is about. But ultimately, players were concerned that the value of their cards was going to go down, and there wasn't any investability or collectability in their cards if they were just going to have a rolling Chronicles set. Fast forward 20 some odd years, and you've got cards that are worth more than $10,000. So was it the right decision? I don't know. Like, if cards didn't have that kind of value, you wouldn't see a major secondary market. There would be no economy because nothing would be worth anything. People wouldn't care. But because you have cards that hold such insane value due to the reserve list, you've got secondary market retailers that can buy and sell these things for huge amounts of profit, or you have people who invest in these things that are driving the price of them. It makes them worth something. So if the reserve list didn't come into effect, or if it didn't ever exist, Magic wouldn't have grown into the game that it is today. That being said, the reserve list existing is what keeps people away from playing certain formats. Vintage, Legacy, Commander is even coming to that same kind of scenario where if you, like I talked about in the community section, if you want to play the faster combo decks or the faster decks that are going to win on turns 3, 4, 5, you're going to have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. Dual lands and mana crypts and mana vaults and tabernacles and Mishra's workshops. These cards cost thousands of dollars. Was it the necessary evil to make Magic grow into the game that it is now? There's something like, 14 million registered DCI numbers globally? Like, there's lots of people that play this game because the reserve list made things collectible. It made people want to buy cards. It made secondary market retailers want to crack more packs to get the cards that are going to be worth more money. And ultimately, it put more cards into the hands of players without printing Chronicles. Thanks, Chronicles. So Chronicles was the catalyst. The reserve list made the game grow, in my opinion. That's what I think. If anybody else has some other opinion or knowledge of the reserve list, let me know on Facebook or on Twitter. What I don't want to hear is Wizards should just abolish the reserve list. It's stupid and it keeps cards expensive and people can't play. This is a legal document that they would have a class action lawsuit against them by millions of people, maybe not millions, thousands of people, if they got rid of. This is not just some policy that they have. No, this was drawn up by their legal department or whatever you want to call them to make sure that they don't get sued if they print cards that are too similar to cards that are worth lots of money. This is a serious document we're talking about, not just something that Mark Rosewater can say, oh yeah, we'll just print Black Lotus. It's not a big deal. So I don't want to hear that they should just abolish it. I want to hear real thoughts on how you think the reserve list grew or impeded growth of the game over the last 20 some years. If you want to do that again, you can leave a comment on the Facebook post for episode 9. You can get at me on Twitter at CADPopcast. If you're a patron, patreon.com/CADPopcast. You could either chat me up in the Discord or send me a message on Patreon or cadpopcast@gmail.com. Probably running a little bit long and my voice is literally fading by the minute. I'd like to thank you for listening, keeping me company, even though I am truly alone in the CCO studio. Really means a lot to me that people are reaching out online, people are listening. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank my sponsors, Fusion Gaming, FusionGamingOnline.com for all of your Chronicles needs, or whatever set they were originally in. And of course, you can check me out on themanabase.com, along with all of FusionGamingOnline.com's other sponsored content. Thanks again, everybody. I'll see you next Wednesday.